Well, welcome everyone to the Casually Profound series on the Size Eyes podcast. I am here today with Declan Berndt. Truly an honor to be conversing with you today. Thank you for being on.
Appreciate it, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So yeah, I met Declan pretty recently in Charlotte through some mutual friends, through men's groups, through ice baths, all the fun stuff. Um, and so something I want to start off with doing, Declan, is just sharing something that we're grateful for.
Yeah.
Is there anything that comes to mind that you've been grateful for either recently or just anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I was taking a walk with a friend in the woods this morning and just struck by the gift and the blessing that is nature. You know, just being able to be the trees and nature are there for us always. You know, they're impartial to where we are, what we're doing. And it feels great to really grateful to step into a place that feels so clean. You know, it's almost as if there's a conversation that's been happening with nature since time began. And it's almost like I'm stepping back into that conversation with nature. And it's just this beautiful sense of knowing and being known. So yeah, really grateful for that. And for the woods in Charlotte, honestly, what a great city to have a lot of outdoor space and place to walk in.
Yeah, amazing. Love that. Spending time outdoors for me has really been able to opportunity to center myself, ground myself, and be present with nature and with myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, something for me that comes to mind, what I'm grateful for is like family. It's cliche, but being able to go back home to Kansas City after I was there recently, but being able to be there for 5-6 months and actually spend time getting to know my parents, getting to know myself, and my relationship with my parents has, since high school, it's been through, weekends, through weeks, and it's not on the months level. So I'm looking forward to seeing that journey. I'm grateful for them having a space that I can explore that with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, man. I mean, my family is an ocean away. So even when you mentioned it earlier that you were going to stay in Kansas with your family, my heart was warm for you. It's wonderful that you're excited to go and you have that space to step into.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, let us do a quick visualization. I love meditating. I love closing my eyes and grounding. And I think you're no stranger to that. So whenever we're ready, we can close our eyes. Take a couple of deep breaths. And sink deeply into our bodies. Feeling each breath that we take in and each breath that we take out. Feeling completely relaxed from the top of our head to the tips of our toes. And from this state of relaxation, let's imagine at the end of this conversation, a truly wondrous, amazing, insightful, casual, and profound chat that we just had. We learn more about each other and ourselves. soak in that feeling for a quick moment. And when we're ready, we can slowly open our eyes and come back to the present moment. Lovely. So, first question, Declan, is who do others think Declan Berndt is?
I love this question, Sai. It's interesting because I do think that when we think about what others think about us, it's ultimately also a projection of what we think about ourselves. So, on the one hand, it's really not my business to account for what other people think of me. What they think about me is really none of my business. I can't control it. So, if I may reframe the question, is this really what do I think about myself? Likely, if I have these attributes and I feel that the embodiment thereof, then other people will experience me as such, and that's likely what they're going to be thinking about me anyways. So I'm going to say, what do other people think about me? What do I think about me? Maybe they're the same thing. And I asked a group of close friends fairly recently, what are some words that typify me? How would you describe me? And some of the words that came out were some ones that trended strongly were authentic and courageous. And so, yeah, I feel that. I feel that for myself, and I'm gonna say that's part of who I am. That's who I am. I'm authentic. I'm courageous, and I think other people are going to experience me that way.
Love that. What makes you say those two words, authentic and courageous?
I'll start with courageous. I've always had a propensity to want to step into the unknown, step into a space that feels potentially uncomfortable. Brian a friend of ours had a great definition of bravery versus courage. And the definition of bravery that that was given was that is doing something without fear, stepping into something without fear. That's a brave person. But a courageous person is the person who feels the fear and does it anyways. So the difference being the acknowledgement of the fact that there is fear in any given moment, but you're still going to go ahead and take that step or do that thing that you're scared to do. And I feel like that is definitely a part of the way that I've showed up in this world and this journey of my life.
So you would say that. So you say courageous because you recognize that there is fear within you, and because of it, or despite it, however you phrase it, you still do the thing.
That's right.
Or be that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Occasionally, maybe I'm more brave than courageous, but for the most part, I would say courageous feels right on.
Love it.
Yeah.
And then what about authentic?
Authentic. Beyond showing up as the world wants me to, or I feel like there's an expectation to show up in a certain way, I've always had a propensity to show up in a way that feels most true for me in that given moment, in that given time. And so that often might look like vulnerability in certain moments with certain occasions, and a willingness to be honest about what's really going on inside of me. So a willingness to take off a mask and lay it aside and let somebody see me. And for that reason, I think that it feels authentic. It feels like you can sense or taste the real me, through whatever interaction we're having, and that for me is another way to describe authenticity.
Mm. Have you felt those before, or like how far, like have you always felt these two words, right? Have you always felt like you were authentic and courageous, or was there a shift in your life or periods of shifts where you started becoming and leaning more into those two adjectives?
Yeah, there was a shift. I think the authentic part was unavoidable for me. I've just always seemed to have to show that unmasked version of myself. But the courageous part, there was a decision in high school. I grew up excruciatingly shy, really quiet, and I felt a lot of shame because of that. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't loud enough. I didn't have a loud enough voice. I didn't want to take up space in a room. And I developed a lot of psychological complexes around being shy and being quiet and, unworthiness. And this decision I made late high school, probably 11th grade, where I said, to hell with it. I'm not going to be that guy anymore. I am going to step in through that and step into situations that are going to force me to come out of my shell. And so people would say, okay, who wants to do the speech on the stage? I'd stick my hand up. Who wants to get on the bar and dance at a club? Okay, I'll do it. So I put myself time and time again into these situations where I forced myself to face the fear and do the thing that scared me the most. Ultimately, that wasn't a persona that I could had any sustainable mechanism to it, because it was sort of outside of my comfort zone. It wasn't really natural to me. But nevertheless, it was the catalyst for starting to take some really courageous steps in other areas in my life.
Mm. I love that. Was there any sort of imposter syndrome that you felt as you were taking those steps, as you were raising your hand to volunteer for those things that you may not have innately done previously?
In my own skin, I would say. Yeah, I would say that I would walk into a room, a situation, a new job, a new social context, and put heaps of pressure on myself to prove to people that I wasn't quiet. So I felt like an imposter in my own skin, because later on, a decade or two or a decade and a half down the line, I realized that it's okay. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to not have to be the main guy in the room or everybody remember. It's okay to not be memorable in every occasion that you enter. And so, yeah, shedding the layer of being an imposter in my own skin was a beautiful process as well.
Mm. Yeah, because I felt that level when you say like expanding beyond your comfort zone and being authentic to your true self and deploying that courage. I felt that imposter syndrome for me when I I started my coaching business last year, and I was trying to figure out what I should call myself. It's like, am I this? I came up with all these like funny names. I actually don't even remember what they were now, but it was just like sometimes I was trying to be too clever.
Okay.
And it's like sometimes you just gotta like there's a clarity over cleverness.
Uh-huh.
Right. So
I like it.
So I was trying to be way too clever. I'm like, okay, let's just be clear. Life and career coach. So like after a few months, that's what I landed on. Seems basic, but hopefully people understand what that means. There's more and more life coaches, career coaches. So combination of the both. The imposter syndrome piece of it was more from, it's like that was, let's say I finalized that name in like May or June last year, but I didn't actually start working with any actual clients one-on-one until November.
Mm.
So I was calling myself a coach for, let's say, June through November and not actually coaching anyone.
Gotcha.
So I was like, hey, I'm a coach. I'm like, it would introduce myself. Here's my LinkedIn. Here's my website. Here's my Instagram, whatever. And then, I didn't have any clients. So like, what am I? How do I reconcile the two in my head?
Yeah.
And that was something that I was going through. But eventually, it's fake it till you make it is, I don't know, could be controversial. But I think in a sense, that's almost what we have to do, where I have to be someone that I'm not to then become that person. I don't know, how do you relate with that?
I love that. Yeah, I can relate to that journey. As you know, I'm writing a book, and there's a famous writer called Stephen Pressfield. He wrote a book called The War of Art, and someone was interviewing Stephen Pressfield, and his whole idea is how do you become the artist in the chair? How do you produce your work of art? And they asked him, when do you become a writer, Stephen? And he said, you become a writer when you say you are. So there's no accolade that somebody's going to say, hey, Sai, you are now career and life coach. Congratulations. Here's a handshake. Here's your certificate. You are when you say you are. And there may be a whole bunch of discomfort as you step into that new identity, as I have as well, right? In my Instagram bio, I say writer, poet, and I don't have a published book. I don't even have a finished book. But for me to write, I need to claim that identity, right? If I want somebody to believe that my work is worthy to be read, I need to be a writer, right? People will see you as worthy when you yourself count yourself as worthy to claim that title. So I love that you did it anyways, and you sat through whatever came up in that period where you didn't have a client. But yeah, deeply identify with that piece.
Yeah. Since you mentioned it, what has been the process, or like explain the book for anyone who is listening, right? Of like, hey, what is a book called? What's the overall premise of it, without giving, everything away? A little teaser, if you will.
Yeah, so I've just finished a couple months ago. I finished the first draft, and in the writing world, there's something called the shitty first draft. So it's, especially in fiction, I'm writing fiction. It's the plot has a lot of curating to do before it's I can present it. Nevertheless, the book is called To My Namesake, and it's a series of letters going back between a father and a son in a process of reconciliation between the two after there was a very dividing incident in the child's adolescence. So it's a father-son coming-of-age novel, and there's a massive twist in the plot right at the end.
Gotcha. What made you want to write that books generally, and then what has now come to fruition in this first draft of that book specifically?
Yeah, it's a great question, since I had initially started writing another book and got 20,000 words, which is about a quarter of the way through, and that book lost life. But why this book feels like it has the life to become its own creation is I deeply identify with the story arc that the main character goes through. So the beginning of the premise is one of a lot of teenage adolescent angst, and there's a lot to unpack in the book itself, as far as forgiveness and self-forgiveness, and what does that mean for us as we endeavor to let go of the things that have happened to us.
Like, what have been those situations? Do any situations come to mind in your life that sparked that or was a catalyst for some of those feelings?
Yeah, so a friend of mine had actually experienced something like this. There was a inappropriate relationship with his stepmom, and this is not a reflection of my life. However, the experience of the protagonist in this case, the adolescent kid in my book, is one where he becomes sexually obsessed with his stepmom. And so stepping into these themes of what it's like as an adolescent to have a lot of these hormones moving through your body, not having necessarily the foundation to handle the input and sexual stimulation in that period of life, right? So now I'm really opening up the floor here to other ways if you want to take it their side. But if we think about the current state of connectivity to and access to pornography and stimulation such as that, I don't know that a lot of people are willing to walk into that kind of environment to or conversation, really, to say, hey, what is actually happening? It's unprecedented, the amount of connectivity and access we have to such things. And that's a journey that I've been on, especially when I was introduced to it much younger in my life. And it's been very difficult to unwind and rewire a lot of the patterning that happened because of my exposure to that stuff. So my protagonist walks through his life in the sense where he, to no fault of his own, had this huge stream of experience opened up inside of him and didn't know how to handle that. Now I want to speak to people in our culture that are going through that as well. Like, we have so much stimulation that do we know how to handle that? How do we find ourselves amidst all of this color, experience, excitement? Where am I actually in all of that? How do I find myself if I'm finding myself lost in all of this external stimuli?
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. It's obviously it's not an easy topic to talk about, at least for me. So I appreciate the courage there, or the bravery, whichever one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's been a struggle for me as well. Like, all that stimuli, and parents can only do so much. I'm surrounded by my peers, by my, let's say parental / teacher figures in my life, but everyone's kind of figuring it out, and like all these new stimuli, whether it's pornographic, whether it's just like knowledge, whether it's just like information, whatever it is, there's like, I don't think humans are, generally speaking, adept, or we're not trained yet to like really have all those sensory inputs, and like actually process them, integrate them in this day and age where like we have to go. There's no actual time to like stop and do nothing.
100%.
And actually think about, what are we looking at? What is my then perception of it?
Mm-hmm.
And going back to your first point about my first question, about like, are we asking even the right question? Right? And what does asking that question mean about ourselves? And are we just asking something that's really a projection of what we believe the question to be, or like the input to be, right? So it's all these layers that are added. It's been I was actually talking to someone here yesterday, got coffee with someone, and he mentioned that there's I asked him if there was someone, that he thought I should talk to and meet and be introduced to, and one person that came to mind was another coach who is younger than me, but he's an addiction coach of specifically in pornography.
Oh wow!
And I hadn't thought about that before, but as there's younger and younger introductions to people, like high school, middle school, elementary school, I don't know, these days, the potential for that, it's like, yeah, I think that's a need in this world. Yeah, that's crazy. So one thing that you mentioned was, well, I guess recently, along the lines of content, you mentioned your Instagram bio of writer and poet that you have on there. I recently saw that you posted that you're going to be going off of Instagram or social media entirely.
I don't do Facebook. Yeah. So
okay.
Basically, Instagram was my entire social media.
Yeah. So, what made you make that decision now?
It really lies in what you were describing and articulating there, in that if we move out just of the word pornography and that particular topic, and we look at it even more broadly speaking, to say the volumes of stimulation we have right now and access to things, it feels like in a lot of ways that I'm experiencing what it feels like to be an adolescent amongst all of this information, all of this access. And I'm personally found myself being lost in that piece of it. I couldn't quite find myself anymore. I'm finding that I was framing my experience of life through how this might look on Instagram. Should I post it? Shouldn't I post it? When I post it, I'm feeling such. It feels wonderful to be seen and to share my art, but it also feels vulnerable. And did I get enough likes? And it's just this very complex emotional web that's happening inside of me. And for a time, it was absolutely supportive of my journey in finding deeper expression of myself. But I found more recently that it's not supportive anymore. So I decided it's time to step away from that, and maybe at some point I will return. But quite frankly and honestly and bluntly, I can't handle it right now. I don't have the internal structures that I want to feel like I'm safely handling the amounts of information that is available to me on Instagram.
Mm. So how did it feel like when you did feel like it was, you could handle it, or you were like, okay, this is a good outlet for my art and my expression, and then what turned to make it so that this is how you feel right now, and it's now something that you need to, prune?
Yeah. I don't know that I know the answer to that question yet, Sai. And I think it was gradual. Initially, I was going through some relational struggles, going through divorce, and so being able to have a platform to share poetry and share my process was really beautiful. I'm very grateful for that. And I was on Instagram for about 3 years, and somewhere in the middle, I think it started to turn where psychologically I just didn't click for me in the same way that it was before.
Yeah, I think that's big, right? And I feel like more and more people want to. I'm including myself in this bunch. It's like get more followers, have more likes, and increase our audience, increase engagement. Mm-hmm. And I think those are all. I don't think any of them by themselves or on its own in a vacuum is a bad thing.
Sure.
Right? But I think it's those thoughts that we think about that then drive those actions, where it may not be fully authentic, but like we post because we want those more likes, because we want more engagement. And then that's the story we tell ourselves to then be like, oh, but so then like it's a vicious cycle, right? We tell ourselves those stories, and then then that's the intention with which we post stuff, and then it just keeps going down and down and down, and until we're like, why am I posting this even?
Sure.
And sure. I think it's always good to step away from something to then realize the value of it, right? Without darkness, we can't see the light, right?
That's beautiful.
And without there being violence or fear, we can't see the peace or the love, right? So I guess I'm paraphrasing MLK's quote there. But yeah, I think the absence of something then really provides the ability to then accentuate when it's something that we want is there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you felt like that with anything else in your life?
As in feeling the extent of the demand for the thing where I'm losing myself in it itself?
Yeah, like that, or like stepping away from something, and then that made you realize, oh, I
Ah.
value this even more now?
Nothing's coming to mind right now. I'm sure there is something, but I like when people ask me questions I haven't thought of before. Makes me dig, but right now nothing's coming to mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I love, yeah, I just love asking questions that like I haven't even thought about before. I was like, wait, this is good. It's a good thing it's being recorded, so then I can like, okay, I need to ask myself these questions. Um, but yeah, something I'll do is I will I listen to podcasts and then I will pause when they ask a question that like, ooh, that's a good question that I need to answer for myself. And I think that kind of relates to what we're talking about information overload, sensory overload, where we receive all this information, input, and then there's no output or very little output. There's no time to integrate and actually imbibe it into our identity, cultivate it, and then express it in some way.
Totally.
And I've found that I've consumed less and less content and more long form content because it takes someone longer to create long form content just by the nature of it. And then somehow there's more wisdom packed, or there is more wisdom packed in that, at least for me. And then I can then take the one or two things that I really like and then dig into that and create my own long form content. From that, I guess, yeah. So I'm curious to hear how the process of any of your expression, whether it's art, poetry, writing, like what that journey has been like.
I'm gonna pull in another piece which we can go down here too, because it does relate to your previous question. Thinking about the absence of something amplifying when you have the presence, once again amplifying the experience thereof. So I was thinking about dating, right? Now I've been divorced for a couple of years, and there's been many periods where I've chosen to be single. Like, hey, I know I need to be single. And it's almost this integrated period. It's like consuming a long form content, and you kind of just sit with that for a while. And the expression of when you're in a place like that, you can process, you can reflect on what happened in your previous relationship. You can reflect on everything that's coming up. So there's a lot of integration and preparing for the next expression of self that comes in the next relationship that you may have, right? And I'm going to link this up to the art piece as well in a second. Then the season shifts and it's like, okay, now I'm going to date. Now I bring a whole different version of self to this next relationship that I have because I've done this period of integration, the period of absence, this intentional absence, the cutting off of Instagram, if you will. And it likens to kind of the seasons of life too, where you have typically this expansion and a contraction, the earth even with all the seasons, expansion, contraction, and expression, impression. And so even with art or writing, there has to be a place where you're sitting with all of that information and you're churning and the contemplation. A lot of the gold comes from the subconscious, right? And so if you give it space to simply process and be, and you just live your life, then when you come back to it in the expansion phase, there's so much fresh stuff to express, right? If you want to stay in a continual state of expansion, you're going to burn out. Your stuff will not feel fresh because it won't be fresh to you. So, as far as art goes, relationship goes, life goes, it's, for me, I'm in a space where I can recognize, hey, it's time to contract. It's time to allow myself to go inward. And then, boom, you're going to see a new version of me or a new creation or a new project. And then that will serve its purpose, and then you come back and forth. I think that answered your question.
Yes. Yes, it did. I love that. One thing I want to get into specifically here is processing, reflection, integration. those concepts, what does that like? What does that look like for you? Because I think when people say the words, it's a vague, abstract concept. So for you, is there anything specifically that you do to be in a process of processing, integration, reflection?
So the initial order you said it was processing, reflection, integration, and I like that order, and I'll tell you why. When you're going through something, particularly something that may be an acute, you may have some big feelings coming through, right? A lot of times you won't know what's actually going on. You just have these enormous feelings. Example, the end of a relationship, you have these enormous feelings. You're processing these feelings. How do you know you're processing? Because you're just feeling them. You have to. You can't avoid it. You feel heartbroken, sad, whatever. And so in that moment, you can't really there's nothing to integrate. You're simply processing, right? And as you kind of move through that stage, the next part will be reflection, right? So that may look like, okay, the journal comes out, or the coherence starts to come through in actual cognitive thinking, like, oh, this is what happened. Oh, this is why I acted such and such a way. Oh, I realized why it didn't work out because blah, blah, blah. Oh, I didn't show up in this way. And so there's a bit more coherence in the way that you're thinking about all the processing that's been happening. And then you kind of move through that stage and you get to the part of integration. And that really belies the question, now what? Okay, so I didn't show up in this way because now what? Now the integration part is, what is the action I take in order to render a different outcome than the one that just happened, right? What is my life going to look like in order to change to a different version of myself going forward? And that's the integration piece.
Yeah, I think I said those words haphazardly, but I'm glad I said it in that order for me to connect. Love that. Well, speaking of those topics, something I like to do is spend some time doing each of those things within a conversation. So, but let's take a quick, 30-second, 1-minute break. And at the end of that, I'll open the floor up to you if you want to ask me a question. Because I really enjoy when people get to know someone's thinking, not just through their answers, but through their questions. Mm-hmm. So I'll invite you to ask me a question, and we'll keep the conversation going from there.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I've been thinking about, I can't remember who said it recently. Oh, no, they didn't say it recently. Who said it is, you become the 5 people that you're around the most. Maybe you know who that is. I'm curious, and if you don't want to do all 5, because for time's sakes, maybe the 3 people that you're around the most, and what are the ways that they're inspiring you to become that maybe surprise you, or what can you recognize in how they're pulling you up into the next stage?
Good question. I hope you're thinking of an answer for yourself too.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. So if it's purely by time, because I think there's a few different ways to dissect that, right? Of like pure time like elapsing, who am I spending the most time around? Technically, um, there are three. There is a definitive list that is there. I
Okay.
may not know exactly what that list is, right? But one person that comes to mind, I won't share her name, but
Yeah.
she's someone I've been talking to last few months. Met on a dating app, and it's allowed me to be more casual. And we're not in a relationship, but it feels like we are, but we're not. Where I feel that emotional vulnerability, that where I can share things, we just call each other randomly. It's not like, hey, are you free to chat tomorrow at 7? It's not like, hey, let's set an appointment. It's just casual calling, and that's probably the way most relationships are, I imagine. But that's not something that I have with my friends normally. I usually want to set like, hey, let's schedule something. I want it on my calendar. And when it's not on my calendar, it's not happening for me. And so I live and die by my calendar. And so being able to go outside of that comfort zone and just experience the spontaneity, that's definitely something that I've been able to lean more into and learn from myself. So I think, that's one person that comes to mind.
I almost like to leave it at one though, because I feel like that's obviously the most impressionable relational thing that's happening inside you right now, and I think it's really cool that you're experiencing like a different side of yourself through this spontaneity through your friend.
Yeah, so. And I definitely have that spontaneous side. I don't know this for a fact, but I want to say I'm like of the elements, I'm more of a water.
Okay.
And so I'm fluid enough, so like that spontaneity, but I can also be held in a container. Like I'm pretty adaptable to situations, so I can be the the person on stage and being the leader from the front, and I also embrace the leader from the back.
Yeah.
I call it the bottom up CEO, where I can step back, just ask a question, not even ask questions, actually, just like observe, see what's going on, take it all in, process it all, and then distill it all into, okay, here's some takeaways, for example, if it's in a business setting.
Yeah.
And so, point being, I have that spontaneous side, but then I think I've leaned more into the structured side. So now this talking with this person has allowed me to lean back more into the spontaneous side.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about yourself in terms of one person that may come to mind of who's in your circle, and then anything that you've been able to glean from that relationship with them?
I've become friends with a gentleman in the city over the last year or so, and we've been able to go incredibly deep together. And we share a lot of similarities in outlook. And I've really benefited from this relationship with this other man, to where I feel like I've been able to share pieces of my life and what I'm going through, what I'm thinking, to the extent that I've never shared with anybody before, at least with another man. And it's been really freeing and incredible to witness the fact that I'm not alone. Oftentimes you feel like I felt like I'm the outlier. I'm the one that experiences life in this crazy way. Does anybody else feel this way? And the answer is, yeah, pretty much everybody is feeling and experiencing the same spectrum of life. And it's nice to be seen in those spaces.
That's big. When you were sharing that, the stuff that came to mind is the men's retreats, men's groups that I've been a part of very recently. And I'm curious to hear what your experience has been like being a part of those groups in that container, as well as the individual relationships outside of that specific container that have been formed.
it's been a beautiful part of my life for the last couple of years to step into a lot of these men's only containers. And the reason being is that in a group, in a container, using that word to say a setting where the environment feels safe to be oneself, it feels hugely liberating to have the option to let myself fully be seen. Oftentimes, I think if we have environments where we're doing intentional work with men and women and both genders, there is an awareness, at least for me, to say, hey, I don't know that I could fully access that emotion right now, because it might not be appropriate for the audience, right? It's not necessarily appropriate to feel rage and express rage in front of, a mixed gender audience. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel constructive. But when it's men only, and you're intentionally behind the idea that you're looking to access these emotions that we've been suppressing for decades, now all of a sudden it's encouraged. Go there, bro. Look me in the eye and frickin' go there. I want you to. And then all of a sudden you're looking around, or you're seeing 15, 20 men, and they're saying, go there. And you're finally feeling the permission to experience the emotion that you haven't in 20 years. And you decide in that moment, yes, I'm going to go. There's so much life. There's so much that can be unlocked in you, or it has been in me, in these spaces. You're completely vulnerable, and to be seen. And then when the men are still there at the end, right? For me, the narrative may have been, if I really express it, if I really let out my rage, they're going to know how ugly I am. They're going to know how flippin' messed up I am. But when you do, and the same 15 guys are all still there, and they're all still sending you love and giving you hugs and making that eye contact with you, you know that even at your ugliest, even at your quote unquote ugliest, you're still okay. You're still worthy. And then to have the backing of those experiences, having gone through those experiences with people like yourself, there's a connection that's happened afterwards. We've been to places already, and so the channels for communication are really open, and it can be really lovely to have that with friends and other men, to have just open channels of communication. Like, hey, you can tell me anything, Sai. Probably not anything in front of the camera, but when it's off, tell me anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's been a blessing for sure.
Love that. Has that been those groups, those settings, those containers? Is that something new to you, or have you experienced that at all previously?
I was deeply involved in the church for a decade, for 10 years. And so there were a number of men's groups that I was involved in within that context. And they were great. What I've more recently stepped into is a more somatic interpretation of men's groups. So if prior to that, the men's groups and men's events I'd attended were a lot of sort of talking and going back and forth, which is really helpful. The new spaces I've entered they're more to do with the body. How can we express that? How can we actually get to the root of the emotion? It's easy to talk about, hey, I feel anger. Well, let's feel the anger. Let's figure out what are the technologies we need to actually go there. And so it has definitely changed over the past few years. And there's certain ways that you can create spaces to experience that connection with men in a very embodied way. Some of the activities we've done at Men's Liberation might be, hey, let's all get in a circle and we're going to mimic each other doing these physical activities and experience what it feels like when 15 men are copying what I'm doing, and we're grunting and we're yelling and we're making these aggressive actions in our body, and it feels great. It feels like I'm a kid again, and there's 15 other kids around me. So it's very connecting, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I think it's quite a new field. Last 20, 30 years, this is starting to be an emerging technology to see how can we do somatic practice together as men. Even in the psychological fields, it's also emerging more. You're going to hear more and more about somatic practice and somatic therapies, modalities.
I love that. Yeah, I resonate, and that's one of those the primal movement activity that that I've experienced once in that setting. It was liberating. It was like letting all those feelings, emotions out, and of course, there's the mind chatter of like before I go, like, okay, what am I gonna do? It's like for me, it's like, oh, I'm gonna do something cool, like funny, whatever it is, right? There was one person, Pavan, he did the Dragon Ball Z,
Oh, cool.
and so like I'm sure he's been wanting to do that,
Yeah.
in his room and like but then to actually be in a setting where other people are doing it and to just let that all out.
Yeah.
I did some like Tai Chi type of stuff in there. So it's like you got the spectrum of people who are that or express in that setting the more aggressive side of things of masculinity,
Sure.
um, and then there's also the calming down,
Mm.
the recovery, the slowing down piece of it as well. That's also part of ourselves. And I actually I did that activity. I led a workshop a few months ago, and I did that activity in that setting.
Wow.
So it was this room. It was inside. There were supposed to be, I guess, 30, 40 people there, but there were some other events going on, some music practice, play practice, stuff like that. But so they eventually dispersed. But then we still had like me and 4 or 5 other people,
Okay.
and so we ended up doing it. And you could see the awkwardness of everyone else there, and I could, and that's when I realized, like, everyone at the, or at least most people at the men's liberation, were free because it was like outside. It was in, I think we had established that safe space, that container to express ourselves.
Yeah.
But then in that setting, it was younger adults,
Okay.
so maybe college age kids who were there, and I saw that they may not have been able to. That may have been the first time they were able to really express themselves. Maybe they're
Gotcha.
inside at home, or at school, and all these like restrictive settings.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the first times where they make these crazy noises. So like I had to, again. So I think example of me being a follower in the first time I did it at the men's liberation, and then in that setting, okay, setting the tone, clapping, like even people felt awkward clapping, like around the outside to keep that energy up.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to see it in the same activity essentially, but in two different settings for two different types of people. Um, and I fully agree about the somatic piece of it.
Yeah.
It's how have you um, how is that related to your life in terms of the the somatic practices for you to then how it then translates into any mental, emotional, psychological effects and benefits to you?
There's a saying that how you do one thing is how you do everything. You may have heard that. And so really it's about access points to the command of your being, really. So in every experience that you're choosing to step into, and you mentioned primal movement now, which is lovely. I picked up on the pattern of processing, reflection, and then integration. As far as you processing in the primal movement circle, right? Then you probably reflected on it and said, wow, that was really amazing. And then you integrated it by actually doing it with another group, which is really cool. The process of moving into the body really brings a whole lot more online for me, as opposed to just even in the brain, parts of the brain. It gives me access to a lot of different expression that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to experience, because my nervous system is shutting down. And so if I'm starting to run the system as a whole, as in mind, body, soul, all of that together as a whole. And the more I do that, the more I feel like, oh, that's what it feels like to be fully present. That's what it feels like to be online, cognitive, in extreme discomfort, for example, an ice bath. That's what it feels like when I'm triggered, something's going on, but my thinking and clarity is still boom right there. That's what it feels like. Now all of a sudden, it's not about, oh, I'm really good at primal movement. Yeah, maybe I'm whatever, if you can be such thing as a good at primal movement. But it's more about, oh, my kid's having a tantrum at home now, and I'm like there. I'm in an ice bath. I'm not in the ice, but I'm in an ice bath right now, and the same somatic practice is happening, the same nervous system override is happening, and I can respond differently to my child at home who's throwing a tantrum. I can respond differently at work when I'm about to present on a meeting because I'm not freaking out because I've done this before. I've done it in the ice. I've done it in the primal movement. I've done it when I'm meditating at home. All of these different practices, they begin to harmonize in this synergistic whole of your life. And then you begin to pick up on the places in your life where you're not hearing that harmony, that melody yet. And so you can kind of apply that same somatic practice to that area as well. And it's beautiful once I'm sure you've experienced this too, Sai, once you start feeling the momentum, like, holy smokes, I'm doing this. I can actually do this. And it feels incredibly empowering.
It's, as you were talking, the thing that came to mind was, like, we focus so much on our IQ, our, what is it, intelligence quotient or whatever it stands for, right? But we don't spend enough time on I think we're starting to recognize our emotional quotient, our emotional intelligence. But then there's also, I think, our spiritual.
Yep, SQ. Yeah, I've heard of that one too.
Yeah, totally. And then our physical
Absolutely.
intelligence as well, right?
Absolutely.
And I think there's so many aspects to that physical aspect, where there's mobility, there's strength, there's flexibility, there's endurance, there's agility, there's speed, all these sorts of things, like balance, all these aspects of our physical body, where, like, sometimes when I go hiking, sometimes I see the or I guess I want to say this, like, I wish we spend more time as children focusing on our physical intelligence.
Absolutely.
Right? Do we actually understand how our body feels? And, like, do we actually know what it feels like to be like this, in this position for this long?
Totally.
And the answer is really no. Like, I didn't, right? It's like, oh, just do some laps, so, like, we know what walking feels like, we think. We know what running feels like. We know what sitting down feels like and stuff like that. But really, like, when we put ourselves in different, whether yoga poses, like different stretches, whatever it is, like different types of movement, to actually allow us to understand our body better. I think, for me, like, playing an instrument is part of that physical quotient, where for right now like in the past, so I play a musical instrument called a harmonium.
Oh, cool.
And so it's kind of like imagine an accordion, but you're playing sitting down.
Okay.
So it's like the normal keys on a keyboard or piano.
Yeah.
So, like, that was something that I had to learn. And so then I became pretty dexterous at the fingering patterns of playing a keyboard, essentially, right? And then, but now I'm learning flute, like a traditional Indian flute, not the Russian flute, but like a wooden flute.
Okay.
And that's a different sort of physical intelligence that I need to learn if I want to actually play that, right? So, like, musical instruments, sports, all the other movement practices that are out there all contribute to being physically intelligent, as the same thing as we would, like, take a course or take a certification program or whatever else to become intellectually intelligent.
Yeah.
The same way that a relationship or a job or whatever else may help us be more emotionally intelligent.
Sure.
So I think
totally.
I want to lead, some sort of charge where we lean more into our physical and somatic intelligence as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Is I guess one thing that you mentioned is that uh, your family is an ocean away, right? Love to hear more about that, your upbringing, and how you arrived here in the United States in Charlotte.
So I'm born and raised in South Africa. My parents are actually still in the same house that I was born in. So I'm 36. They've been there for 36 years. So I had an incredible amount of stability. They're still together. And South Africa is a beautiful place. But I also grew up in a number of years pre-reunion of South Africa. So it was in segregated South Africa. So a lot of my formative years, as we know, 0 to 7 are the most formative cognitive years of your life. It was in a segregated society. And I've only begun to unpack that now in my mid-30s, what that actually meant for me to have gone through that in that environment. But South Africa is a great place to grow up, and reminds me a lot of Charlotte, actually, which is why I was happy to move here. I met my ex-wife, who's an American, and we got married and lived in South Africa for a bit before moving over here to the States. So that's how I've arrived in America, and now I'm an American. And it's been a wonderful journey, difficult in the beginning to assimilate to a new culture and country. And about 4 years in, I decided there's no point in having a foot in each country, and America is home. I am going to be an American, and I'm not even going to say, quote unquote, back home anymore, referring to South Africa. No, America is home. And since making that decision, I feel like that commitment has really helped me and allowed me to embellish society and the ways of living in America. And so been in America 9 years, and 2 in New York and 7 here in Charlotte, and I love it. I'm happy to be here. And it's wonderful to feel like I was explaining this to someone earlier. Charlotte's it's a small, big city, right? And I feel like there's a lot of space for us to grow in this place. We're still finding an identity as a city. And so I'm very happy to be a part of that and to build into that and to find Charlotte's voice here in America.
Yeah, I do resonate with that. A small, big city where it feels like you don't need to drive too far to experience most of the things in the city and how all the things that Atlanta does or a bigger city does.
Yeah.
But you also feel like you can find these spots that are very local, that are very niche, that are very, community oriented, community based.
Definitely. Yeah.
And make your own community and not feel lost in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good spot.
Is there anything, as you wrap up here, anything that has been on your mind that you want to share?
Yes, I've recently been thinking about the word liberation and how trying to dictate what that might look like for somebody else is impossible. And for me, arriving at this definition of when you're liberated, you're free from having to strive. I said strive to liberate yourself, but really the true liberation is the end of the striving itself. And for me, it's it's easier to equate liberation to the breaking through of something, right? Scoring the touchdown, finding that kind of energy of breaking through. But I'm in a season now where the liberation itself is actually not breaking through, but it's allowing the fact that I don't have to break through, right? It's allowing a lot of space in between, which is incredibly liberating. And we think about let's take ice bathing for an example, right? For some people, it's going to be a liberation to step into the ice. Oh my gosh, there's so much fear. How's it going to feel? I'm liberated. I got in the ice. I did it. I did it. For others, it's going to be, hey, I have forced myself over and over and over to do these hard things. My liberation today is to say, guys, I don't want to. And I can leave that ice bath and say, I did it. I said I don't want to. And it's important for me to practice that in my life, that it doesn't have to look like other people think it looks. And when I'm at an ice bath and somebody declines and says no, I don't have to force them. We don't have to force them. That could be their liberation right there, right now. And so giving myself that grace to make my choices that feel right, and it's all liberation, it's all the same. So I'm gonna land with that.
Love that. What came to mind is I have a newsletter dropping out next week. It's very similar along those lines, and when we say for me, the word is freedom, and I think we use that. I've used that pretty loosely as a word.
Okay.
But actually, when I dug down and spent the time to reflect and what is freedom actually? I think there were a few different types of freedom. I call it the freedom STEM, so it's an acronym.
Okay.
So it's like S is spatial, so spatial freedom / like movement. So
okay.
Can we, like within Charlotte, do I have a car? If I don't have a car versus a car, my spatial freedom is different, right? Can I travel the world versus am I confined to the city or the local village that I'm in, for example?
Yeah.
So that's the S, spatial. T is time freedom.
Okay.
E is emotional freedom. So our responsibilities that we have, the burdens that we have, all those sorts of things. And then M is money. So do we have money freedom, like financial freedom? Those are the 4 categories. But then what I realized is there's two more types or 2 more sections that then create 8 overall categories, the 4 times 2. And that's actually freedom to do something, and then the freedom from something.
Hey-yo, I love this.
And so what it really comes down to is optionality. Freedom to, I realized, is optionality. Do we have the freedom to do that? We have the option of doing this. We have the option of doing that. We have the option of traveling the world. We have the option of buying this thing with money freedom. But what you're saying of the person who doesn't want to take the ice bath, and that is their liberation, that is a freedom from. That is...
You're nailing it. This is exactly, this is beautifully articulated.
Right? And so we spend in this rat race, this tying it back earlier to this information that's being consumed. We want to learn this, we want to learn that, so we have the freedom to do this. But actually, when we take time to do nothing, that is the true liberation. That is the freedom from. And then from that freedom from, we then have the optionality to do everything.
Once again, this is gorgeous. Great job of tying it all together. Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, let's liberate ourselves from from this podcast conversation and keep this conversation going. But appreciate the time, Declan. This was truly an honor to be conversation partner with you on Casually Profound series.
Thank you for having me on. Loved it. It's been fun.
Amazing. Well, hopefully you guys had as much fun as we did, and we'll see you again on the Size Eyes podcast. See ya.